Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and Brendan couldn't be joining us today, but it's okay because in his place I have someone whose appearance on this show will be clear very shortly as I talk about the game we're covering today. But he and I go way back. He's one of my best friends, and he is an expert on the topic we are about to discuss. His name is Trevor Longman. Trevor, what's up?
Hey, Adam. Happy to be here. Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, so you and I, as I said, we go way back. We've been friends for many, many years, going back to high school. And the game that we are talking about today is a Dreamcast racing game by the name of Kart Flag to Flag. And the reason I wanted you on this show is because you are by far the biggest kart American open wheel racing fan that I know of.
There's dozens of us, literally dozens of us. Yeah, one of the few holdouts, I guess, since we're going on 20 years now since it was at its peak. So I guess I'm one of the few that are remaining. But yeah, this was a huge part of my life growing up. Watching kart in the early days, going to see the races, that's what kind of got me into motorsports in general, which led into racing video games and things like that. So, this is something very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and as soon as Brendan and I started the series of talking about Dreamcast racing games in particular, I always knew that one day we were going to get to Flag, and when we had the Flag to Flag show, that you had to be on it, because, I mean, when I discovered this game existed when I was like collecting Dreamcast games. As soon as I learned that there was a kart game, an officially licensed kart game on the Dreamcast, I was like, shit, Trevor's got to play this. He's going to love it. And I remember the day you came over and played it. But before we go into that, I'll just give some brief background on the game. So, as I said, today we're talking about Flag to Flag, which actually, technically, kart is not a part of the game's name. It's just called Flag to Flag. If you look at the side of the box, it just says Flag to Flag. In Japan, it was called Super Speed Racing, which is a very, late 90s Japanese name for a racing game. Developed by a company called Zoom Inc., which is notable in as much as they aren't at all when it comes to racing games. They made one racing game that was F1 themed in the early 90s for the Sharp X6800 computer, which is not something that ever existed in America. But I know them best as a company that made Mr. Mosquito, which is a really weird game on the PS2 where you play as a mosquito and you have to suck blood from basically every member of this family in this household. And another game called Phalanx, which I linked you to the cover art. Basically, Phalanx is this like SNES game that's like a space shoot 'em up, and it's a totally forgettable game outside the fact that it has the weirdest cover art I have ever seen. And you should, like, everybody who's listening to this should check it out if you don't know the Phalanx cover art. I mean, it's basically just like some redneck dude with a beard and a banjo sitting in the middle of the night as
this might be my favorite thing
explodes over his head.
I truly don't know what the creative design process was for this, but it's a gift to the world that everyone needs to look at.
Right. So basically all of this is to suggest that, this is not a studio. Zoom was not a studio that really ever made racing games or specialized in racing games. But they made this one. And it came out in Japan on March 25th, 1999, which was 2 days after my 6th birthday. And it came out in the U.S. on September 9th, 1999, which, of course, all of us Americans know as the Dreamcast launch date. So this was a launch title in the U.S. And it's very notable because, we didn't get a lot of American open wheel racing games. The idea of a kart game is there weren't many of them. And it also came at a very interesting time for the series. So I know we have a lot of listeners who don't live in America or don't have a ton of background on IndyCar and all that stuff. And this would be a good time, Trevor, for I think you kind of I think you could like lay the groundwork for like what is kart or what was kart and where was kart at this time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to explain the history of American open wheel racing, particularly in the 90s, we would need far longer than what we have available to us today. But just in the basics, in the early 90s, there was IndyCar as it was on a huge upswing. You had Formula One superstars coming over to race in America rather than in Formula One. Guys like Nigel Mansell, Ayrton Senna tested. Whether that was just for leverage and contract negotiations, that's up for debate. But it was a powerful thing, and it was growing, and it was all centered around the Indy 500. The Indy 500 still remains to be the crown jewel of American racing, but at the time it was rivaling. I mean, you could still say it's rivals the Le Mans 24 Hours and Monaco Grand Prix for the biggest race in the world, but it held a lot of power, and that speedway was owned by the Holman George family. And as the rest of the series grew bigger and bigger, they felt like their race was kind of losing its place as the one important race to win, and they wanted, to go back to the heritage of American racers racing only on ovals, not going around the world and turning left and right and doing all these crazy tracks and everything. They just wanted Indianapolis as it's always been. So in 95, they announced that they were going to be forming the Indy Racing League, what we now know today as IndyCar. And that was going to be just pretty much as I described, American guys, American tracks, only ovals, with the Indy 500 as being the crown jewel. There were a couple teams that jumped ship, but for the most part, it was just, a lot of lower level teams, lower level talents, all the money, the teams, the top drivers, those were all still remaining in kart, the manufacturers. So for the time in the late 90s up until maybe 2001, this was still where all the talent was at. This was the biggest machines, the 1,000 horsepower, lots of money flowing into it. And things were great. But if you looked beneath the surface, you're seeing all these cracks start to form, and it caused a lot of confusion among the fan base and sponsors as to, we want to be with you guys, but we need to sponsor the Indy 500. And not having that on their schedule really started to tear apart everything at the seams. By the time 2001 rolled around, manufacturers started to pull out and jump ship to IndyCar and the IRL. Teams followed, sponsors followed, and kart ended up going bankrupt at the end of the 2002 season and turned into Champ Car, which then folded into IndyCar in 2007. So right here in what we have flag to flag in 99 is largely considered to be the peak of late 90s kart. Like of this era after the split, 99 is the mountaintop. So they really did pick a great year to capture the greatness of what it was.
And this game is actually, it's based on the 98 season, having come out in 99. So it has all the drivers from all the teams. Well, actually, I was looking up. It doesn't have all the drivers, right? Because there are some people that maybe, participated in one race or here and there. But it's got 27 drivers from 18 teams. It has every track on the calendar. It even has, in the championship mode, when you're looking through the tracks and the races, you can see the day that race was run in 98, and you can actually set the game up so that the weather conditions mimic the actual conditions of the race in 1998, which is pretty impressive.
I don't know of any other game that did that at that time. It's kind of even going back since then, I haven't seen a game that mimics the actual real life conditions of the race as it ran. Certainly dynamic weathers and weather and things like that. But that was a pretty interesting feature at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of games where they'll give you randomized, or quote unquote dynamic, although nothing was really dynamic back in the late 90s when it came to weather or anything like that. But yeah, it is a pretty cool feature, and that's one small thing I really appreciate about this game, that when you're browsing through the drivers and you're looking at the tracks, there is so much information. I mean, honestly, it's not a ton, but basically every driver has sort of a report card that's just like when their first kart race was, when how old they are, how many wins they have, where their first victory, stuff like that, which I think is really cool. I think that's like, racing is really, we watch racing for the spectacle, but I think at the end of the day, like any other sports, about the personalities, and I think kind of building that history and building that context is really important. And at this time, they didn't know that karts, this was basically the peak of the championship, but at this time you could definitely see they're trying to build this sort of context around the series, and it made a lot of sense, partnerships like this making this game and kind of imbuing it with all this information and stuff. So it's interesting because, like, well, as we'll talk about, the game itself, like physically and gameplay wise, it doesn't feel like a very polished product, but at the same time there are aspects of it that made me think they were trying their best to capture what kart was at this time, which is pretty it's pretty good because we don't have many history pieces like this. As I said, there aren't many kart games that we can go back and turn to.
No, certainly not. And that applies to all of American open wheel racing, past about this time.
Yeah, and we can just briefly touch on some of those other games. I mean, like, you did have kind of this weird small little boom of like American open wheel racing games in the late 90s. Newman Haas sponsored not one but two racing games, one on like the SNES and one on the PS1, which is weird because they weren't working with the kart license, or I guess what would have been at that time the IndyCar license. It was really just the Newman Haas Racing team, and Newman Haas Racing on the PS1 in '98 actually was. I'm not sure if it was entirely developed by them, but it had involvement from Pignosis and Bizarre Creations, who made the Formula One games on the PS1, which were, of course, very well loved. And it even had commentary from Danny Sullivan and Bob Varsha, which is when I watched footage of that game and I heard Bob Varsha's voice. At first, I didn't know it was him. I was like, wait a second, hold on, and I was like, shit, that's Bob Varsha. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that them being the commentary team, Danny Sullivan and Bob Varsha, they were the ones doing commentary for the kart series at the time. It's interesting to me that their services would not be applied to the official kart game. It would be applied to this game that was commissioned by one of the teams, and it had a couple of the main drivers, but none of the official teams beyond Newman Haas Racing. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting dilemma there.
Yeah, what I think is funny is that Danny Sullivan recorded, I think, most of the commentary lines, whereas it was clear that they only got Bob Varsha for like maybe 10% of the lines, or he really only says 3 or 4 things, whereas Danny Sullivan has way more lines in the dialogue. So yeah, definitely. I mean, Bob Varsha was doing F1 at the time, so it makes sense. But yeah, the only kind of gap in the game's coverage of kart, going back to Flag to Flag, the only kind of gap in Flag to Flag's coverage of kart at the time is that they couldn't get Michael Andretti's likeness in the game because he had the game named after him. I mean, that's what we would assume. There's no kind of hard evidence of this, but Andretti Racing was a game first on 16-bit systems, and then on the PlayStation and Saturn in the mid-90s, and then again in like 97 or 98. That's the only reason why we would assume that he's not in this game, but he's just basically been replaced with a driver named Carl Haas, who is, of course, the team owner and not actually a driver.
Yeah, I would have to assume that it's based on Andretti Racing and not the Newman Haas Racing game, because if it was based on the Newman Haas Racing game and them having a problem with their likeness in the game, then we wouldn't have Newman Haas Racing, and it certainly wouldn't be Carl Haas as the driver. Michael Andretti. The other Newman Haas drivers are in Flag to Flag. So yeah, Fittipaldi at the time is the teammate. He's in the game as well, so it has to be an Andretti issue. But that game was kind of interesting because it took a different angle at it. It had the American open wheel stuff, but it also had stock car racing and dirt track racing, and I guess it tried to mimic Mario Andretti's career path and all the various disciplines that he raced in, but that was kind of a different take on it.
Yeah, Andretti Racing, like I went back and played it on the PS1 a while ago. I don't think it's a particularly fun game. It was probably fine for the time, but it is notable because it's the only game I can imagine that like it was basically like, think of Toka Race Driver and all disciplines that had, but imagine if Toka Race Driver was totally focused on American racing, like, and the three pillars you could say of American racing are, you know, American open wheel, NASCAR, and dirt track kind of. I don't know what you even call that because I have no
grassroots.
Grassroots, yeah, I have no vocabulary for that kind of racing, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So the dusty oval, the mud, whatever. Yeah. So Andre Racing is very interesting in that way. But yeah, this would be kind of the end of. You would get a couple more American open wheel racing games. I mean, Codemasters had an IndyCar sponsor game in 2005.
Yeah.
But
there was also Kart
that
Fury,
point,
which I think was the year after, or 2001, I think. Kart Fury was on I forget which platform that was on, but it also had arcade cabinets that you can still find all over the country, and truck stops and pizza places and movie theaters, etc.
Yeah, Kart Fury was 2001. I was watching footage of that game too, and actually there's some Time Extend people on our Twitter and whatnot who reacted to that game. It seemed to get a lot of attention because it is Kart Fury is basically prime midway arcade racing game circa late 90s, like your Cruisin' USA's, your Rush, that kind of stuff, with a kart slant, and it has by far the most ridiculous crashes I have ever seen. Like,
there's a part of me that believes, you're not going to get this reference because you still have refused to watch it, but I firmly believe that they took a look at that game and then built the movie Driven, a cinematic masterpiece. They built the movie Driven around that game and its ridiculous crashes and over-the-top gameplay, and said that we must build our entire movie around this game.
Which is funny because Driven had its own game.
Yeah, exactly. Which I was unfortunate enough to own on PS2, and it was just truly horrific. Like, it had this like feature where once you went fast enough, the game went slow motion as you got, like, quote unquote in the zone or something.
Yep.
And everything got like blurry, and the sense of speed, like you're going 200 plus miles an hour, it slowed the game down to make it look like you're going 40 miles an hour, which is an interesting game design decision, in my opinion.
The early to mid 2000s was rife with all of these developers from every corner of the world basically saying, like, racing isn't interesting enough. What we need to do is come up with some kind of gimmick. It's not exciting enough. So you had the wind whooshing effect of Driven. You had Corvette Evolution GT, where like if you trail the driver, our Racing Evolution did this as well, where if you trail the driver long enough, they would freak out because of the pressure. They would just like all of a sudden just like spin out at like 100 miles per hour down straightaway for no discernible reason. You had like a bit later on, you had games like Need for Speed Shift, where it's like, I didn't know that racing drivers, once they go past 80 miles per hour, all of a sudden they become their peripheral vision is literally blind, and the only thing they can see is the road outside of them in front of their dashboard. Like, all these weird gimmicks, that we thankfully kind of have moved past, but
yeah, we've evolved. On a personal note, there was a long time I didn't know that Kart Flag to Flag existed. I didn't know that this game was out there. So when I got my hands on a copy of Driven in like probably 2004 or something, I had a PS2 at the time. This was the closest thing I had to a kart game, and I cherished it. I knew it was bad at the time. I played it a lot. So imagine my like shock and disbelief when years later you introduced me to Flag to Flag, and I'm like, what have I been wasting my time with the whole time? And this was out there, and I almost bought a Dreamcast when you introduced me to this game. I'm like, I got to go find a Dreamcast on eBay or something so I can buy this and play this all the time. I came dangerously close to doing that.
yeah, so we'll move it back to Kart Flag to Flag now, and yeah, so I remember when I got this game, or when I found out this game existed, and I'm like, dude, there's a kart game, and you're like, no way. And you came over and played it, and I remember, like, I don't remember any particulars, but I remember feeling, like, this weird sense of, like pride for myself that, like, I was able to kind of, like, connect you with this aspect of your childhood that was not previously possible. And I was like, I kind of watch you play it, and a tear didn't stream down my face, but, like, you know, it wasn't that far away from happening. I
was crying tears now for both of us.
Yeah, it was cool because I know I knew how much, pretty much as soon as I met you, I knew how much it's mattered to you. And this was probably 2010 or something when I got this on the Dreamcast, and I had known you for a year or two at that point. And it was also, I mean, it was good for me because, like, I had absolutely no reference point for American open wheel racing. So you would tell me things. You would tell me, like, how great kart was. Almost like when I would just go on about games like Daytona USA and Scud Race and Sega Racers that you didn't care about. And you tell me about kart, and I'd be like, yeah, whatever. But then once I played this game, I was like, okay, I'm starting to understand what this was. You know, I'm starting to get it. Because, I mean, when we were young, I mean, you were fortunate enough to go, you know, your dad was a big racing fan, and it was kind of part of your family and your upbringing to go to these things. But, like, I had never been to a race until, like, 2008. So yeah. The only way I was ever going to learn about this was honestly by playing a video game.
Yeah, this was a great, you know, point of, you know, way to bridge that gap and, like, kind of translate what my interests were, what your interests were, and kind of meet in that middle ground. So this just really formed a really nice bridge.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I remember playing the game for the first time myself and going through the list of drivers and, you know, seeing all these names that you have mentioned in the past. And the one that I want to touch on the most, which you'd be very proud of me because I did a fair bit of research into this last night. I watched several videos and everything, is Greg Moore. Because this was, you know, Greg Moore would pass away at Fontana about 2 months after this game came out. But he is in Flag to Flag, and I mean, not having any previous knowledge of kart. You know, I didn't know who Greg Moore was until you told me about him. But when I started playing this game, he was a driver that I kept. I would do the championship in, and I kept playing as. So that was pretty special.
Yeah. I mean, that was. I guess he passed a little more than 20 years ago to the day. But yeah, a tremendous talent. My PlayStation username is still Red Gloves Rule 99, as a reference to him, and he had the signature red gloves. Yeah, he was a tremendous talent, taken way too soon. Probably would have been on to huge things later on. He was only in kart for 4 years, but he was going to be moving on to Team Penske, and as we know, you know, Team Penske is a powerhouse of American racing. He was going to move on there for the 2000 season, and you know, we can only imagine what he would have been going on to accomplish.
Yeah, which is why, like, it's so. I don't know if it's appropriate or fortuitous or what that we got Flag to Flag at this time, but you know, it really hits something we'll keep saying over and over again. Is it really hit at the apex of the series? You know, right before one of their rising stars was taken away. Who definitely had a lot of, you know, was earning a lot of public interest and could have brought the series to a higher place. So yeah, when you go back and play this game, it is a lot of what could have been between Greg Moore and between just the series in general and what would happen over the next couple of years. But I do. Yeah, I mean, right before we go into the kind of physics and how the game actually plays, where we'll definitely be more critical of it, I do think it's cool that, you know, I was saying before, like when you're looking at the list of drivers and you see all the information about them, you look at the car models, and they actually went to the trouble of modeling the differences between like the Swift chassis and the Reynard chassis, and I think that's really cool because they didn't have to do that. You know, you look at a lot of racing games on the PlayStation, for example. I had open wheel racing games, and like all of those chassis look exactly the same because it's like, well, we only have like 7 polygons to use, so like why make it more difficult than it has to be? But they actually like they model the differences between the cars. They model the differences between the oval and road course specs. So depending on whether you're, in driving a circuit or you're on an oval, you'll see the huge wings if you're on the road course, and on the oval you'll see like basically the little 2x4s they have flapping off the ends of the nose. That's really cool. That's, I really appreciate that. It's just like a motorsport racing, nerd.
Yeah, for me as an aficionado of this, to see them make the little subtle differences between, like you said, the Swiss chassis, the Lolas, the Reynards, all the different intricacies of the sport, and them paying attention to this and really making an effort to get it right, like that goes a long way for me. And I think that, it's really cool to see them try to make this effort. Like even down to things like the pace cars. Like they have a pace car before every race. And they modeled everything from like they had a BMW, they had a Toyota Supra, they had a Honda NSX, and then they mashed that up to the pace car that was actually pacing the field at each of those races. Like that's an unnecessary detail, but they went as far as to do that, and it just kind of sheds some light onto the lengths that they went to get it right. Yeah, I mean, even like I noticed that Greg Moore in like his signature red gloves, they're modeled into the game. Like, and that could have been something that they just, we have 2 blue cars in the field. We're gonna make them both identical and maybe change the helmets a little bit. But no, they actually went as far as to do that, and that's something that, is a small detail that only a handful of people would pick up on. But they made the effort to do that, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's stuff like that that's really cool, and I noticed. I went from driving his car to the one that was, what was it? It was a Joe LaFerrin car, the Valvoline one. And the interior and the steering wheel and everything was totally different from the other car I'd been driving. I was like, wow, they even went to trouble of, kind of changing the way the steering wheel looks in the cockpits. When you drive from the helmet cam, there's a T-cam and the helmet cam. When you drive from the helmet cam, the bugs, I mean, they're really just brown smears. It honestly looks like just like kind of poop's been flung at your face, but
they're trying their best at them.
Right. They'll hit the visor, and then the driver will take his hand and wipe his hand across his visor and get rid of it. So stuff like that. There are definitely cool touches. The driver will shift, will reach down with their right hand and shift. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. They even had certain things like different tire compounds in the game, soft and hard. Although as far as I can tell, there isn't actually any sort of tire wear in the game, so I don't really know what effect that actually has. But they have an option there to do a hard or soft tire compound.
Yeah, and this is where we will get into where some of the game's ambition falls flat, because like there is a full damage model in this game ostensibly, but I could not get it to work, which is pretty funny because like I remember when I first started playing this game, I was shocked, or not shocked, but I was very confused why every time I had some sort of like horrible crash, the words "full course caution" would like flash on the screen, and then all of a sudden I'd be restarting the race from the back. Like it was very confusing to me. But the thing is, last night I tried to play, and I tried to play with the damage set to real, because you can turn the damage off. There's an arcade damage, which is a little bit more forgiving, but the damage still on. And then there's the real one, which is, of course, the most punishing. And no matter what I did, no matter what I hit, nothing fell off my car. There was no damage. I was never forced to retire from the race. And as far as I can tell, that has to be a glitch, because I don't know why when I turn damage on, it wouldn't actually do anything.
Yeah. There's, like you said, ambition has a tendency to fall flat in this game.
Yeah, I mean, they're fully animated pit crews, so they definitely like went to a certain degree that, the ambition, the drive was there. It just didn't necessarily pan out. Something that you noticed that I never did, because I don't know that much about kart, but was hilarious when I did. I don't think anyone has ever recognized this before. I mean, granted, there's probably like 200 people in the world who have played this game, but You made a discovery in the arcade mode that I don't think has ever been brought to public attention.
Yeah, it only applies to the arcade mode. But the grid order, first off, you always start at the back of the field, but the grid order is exclusively based off of the car numbers. So Alex Zanardi, number 1, he starts on the pole every race. Then we have Alonso Jr. and Andre Ribeiro, number 2 and 3, and they're going to be second and third. Whatever car you end up being, they will swap out with Greg Moore, number 99, the last place car. They're going to put him in the spot of where your car that you're driving would ordinarily have been. So there is not, they didn't even program like a randomize grid button. Like, I'm not even asking them to faithfully recreate the grid that would exist, so we don't have guys like, the back markers are starting on pole and etc. All that. They just, that's extremely lazy, right? Like, they just put in the grid order based on the numbers and then just hit send it. That works. Like the stamp. Go.
I really, I mean, to me, I feel like it was just an oversight. Like, it's so lazy that you even have a hard time justifying it as like a choice that someone actually made. Like, I feel like it was just an oversight. They didn't realize it. They didn't test it. It's funny because there were a full 6 months between this game releasing in Japan, which was already 3 months after Dreamcast came out there, and this game coming out in the US. So they definitely had time to optimize it and fix it. I think it's interesting that on the intro screen in this game, in Japan, it says Super Speed Racing and there's a kart logo next to it. But in the American version, the intro splash screen just has the kart logo. It doesn't say flag to flag, which indicates to me that they finished this game, and I mean, Sega of America didn't even know what they were going to call it. Because it's you won't necessarily not being a Sega, someone who really has history with the Dreamcast or anything like that. This may have slipped by you
for that.
But it's very weird how this game is sponsored. I keep saying sponsor. How this game was marketed as a Sega Sports title in the U.S. Because Sega Sports, they did the NBA 2K series, the NFL 2K series, and those games were the big. I mean, NFL 2K was probably the system seller, the killer app in the U.S. when the Dreamcast came out. I mean, that game was no one ever seen a sports game looked anything like that before. So I think to piggyback off that success, or because they anticipated how much of a big deal that game would be, Sega of America was let's make Flag to Flag a part of this kart game. Let's make it a part of the Sega Sports repertoire, which was a very smart move. But I feel like the Japanese development team, they finished the game, and then they were like, what do we call it? What's it going to be in the U.S.? They're like, we'll think of something later down the line. Just put the kart logo in there and send it. Because they didn't... The name of the game isn't even in the game in the U.S., which I just think is amazing. So, there's definitely a breakdown in communication or something at some point along the line.
Sure. Yeah, I could 100% see that when I'm playing the game.
Yeah, I mean... Again, it's so weird when you're looking at the box art. It says Sega Sports. It's a very the Sega Sports box art you only got in the U.S. where it's got that certain kind of font, and it's got usually there's somebody from the sport on it. So in this case, you have the game case is far away from me. I can't remember who's on the cover. You would probably be able to.
I think it's Fernandez. I think it's Adrian Fernandez.
Yeah. So you have him and you have somebody else, I think. And there's a real shot of an actual, a photograph of a kart race or a car or something like that.
Yeah.
But this game was developed by a Japanese team so far removed from that whole Sega Sports program that it's this weird disconnect where I didn't know what to expect when I started playing it. I expected to see the same, because Sega Sports, there were the Visual Concepts team was the one that developed NBA and the NFL games, and they still make 2K owns them now, but they still make the NBA 2K series. And there was always this consistent through line with the menus and everything and the way those games looked when you started playing them. And this not being from that team, it's completely different. It's you have a certain expectation when you start playing it, and it's totally gone as soon as you boot it up. So it is a really odd duck, this one.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to get into the physics of it all and the gameplay and all that?
Yeah. The the physics are where this game falls apart. I think it's
Yep.
safe to say.
Mhm.
It's a shame because sometimes they're okay. Like, and it is really because the way this game handles is it's just incredibly linear to a point where, like, and what I mean by that is, like, when you are moving slowly, you have all of the grip in the world. You have too much. And when you are
Yeah.
going very fast, you have none. And not just like, when you try and turn the wheel on and you're on oval and you're going 240 or something like that, like the back might step out or it gets a little squirrely. No, like you literally can't turn the car. Like it your tires basically don't exist. They've been replaced by cinder blocks. It is impossible to change direction when you are at top speed in this game, which makes the oval racing not fun.
Yeah. Take everything you know about downforce and flip that around backwards.
Right.
The faster you go, the less grip you have, and the slower you go, infinite amounts of grip. You can go through hairpins at 60 miles an hour, no problem.
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, that's everything we know. Like you're saying, everything we know about the way these cars are supposed to handle. They're supposed to have more grip when they are moving faster, and they don't. And oversteer totally is not something that exists in this game. It is absolutely impossible to get your car to spin or have the back step out at all.
Yeah, so like the perfect example for me is if anybody knows the front straight at Long Beach. It's not straight. It's this long sweeping corner that is flat out in any vehicle known to man. In this game, it is a brake and downshift twice kind of corner because there's just no way that you can keep it flat out to go through this. That's probably the best way I can describe it to anybody who's never played this. It's just impossible.
And it's weird because, like, the AI doesn't... They're not subject to the same physics as you. I mean, that in and of itself isn't weird in an old racing game, but they can carry speed through that corners and you can. But then usually when you come to a low speed corner, they take it at like 15 miles per hour and you can just fly by them. So it really poses a problem because you're working with different tools than the AI is. But the funny thing is, and this is what's heartbreaking about and why I say it works some of the time, is that like I said, I was playing Detroit, and Detroit is just full of medium and low speed corners. There's really not one particularly fast corner on the track. I mean, when you're on like the back straight or something and there's like kind of a kink, like that's difficult. But the rest of it's actually pretty fun to drive, and there's no grass on that track, so you don't get hit with the ridiculous quicksand effect that you do when you hit grass in this game. So
the worst I've ever seen.
Tracks like that, yeah, it's really bad. You actually, I looked at it, you always slow down to 31 miles per hour when you hit the grass. Exactly.
Which is problematic on an oval. So like, let's say you hit grass, you're going 230 miles an hour, imagine, and then immediately the grass will slow you down to 31 exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a shame because like on some tracks, this game is fun if you're not going above a certain speed. I did enjoy the drive at Detroit. It was nice. I was even able to, like, the curbs don't slow you down. I mean, they do, but not as much as the grass. So I was worried about, like, how will this react to curbs? And the car was actually fine. So there are flashes. There are moments in this game where you're playing it where you see what could have been if they just didn't make that the high speed aspect of the handling model so weird and antithetical to what it should actually be.
Yeah, I really have never experienced a game that handles it all like this. When I played it the first time, I really wanted to like it, and I think you can attest to it. Like, I was pushing through it just for my love of the subject matter that it was based around. And that's not to say I haven't had a good time with it, but I was definitely trying to give it more of a path than it deserved in the physics department.
Yeah. And it really, the story doesn't get much better from there because like the AI and just difficulty scaling of this game is similarly broken. Yeah, the AI, as I said, they're very slow. I think they're faster on the ovals because like they don't have the same limitation that you do as a player, but yeah, just it ends up being just like almost like kind of an early race in like a game like GT6 or GT Sport or something, where it's just like catch up, like follow the leader, except like you will never have a challenge. Even once you catch up to a leader, you could probably lap the entire track. I mean, it's not that hard, even on like the medium difficulty, because they are that slow. And the other thing too is there is no AI to the AI. Like, there is a path they follow. They never deviate from it. They never pass each other. And the hilarious thing is, if for whatever reason you impede their path, so let's say that you're on the racing line and you just park your car, they will all hit you and they will all hit the cars behind them, leading to literally like this train, this like stopped snake in the middle of the track, where no one is trying to get out of the situation, no one is trying to go around you. They are all just stuck behind each other like magnetically.
They're just waiting in line. Yeah,
exactly. And it's hilarious, but it's also really sad.
Yeah. I will say that like none of the AI are any good they're very easy to pass up until you get to second, at which point the rabbit cars are absolutely out of hand. There's like it's always Alex Zanardi, because Alex Zanardi's number one and he's always starting in first, but he's always flying, I mean, probably 20 seconds ahead of the rest of the field. So that is actually kind of a challenge to get up to the front, to lead there. Although if this is based around the 98 season, that's pretty much accurate. That's actually not very far off. Because I think he won like most of the races that year.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time though, like 27 cars on track was a pretty impressive feat at the time. Like that's not something that you saw in every game.
Right. So this isn't a game that I would say like really pushes the Dreamcast very far. It's a launch title. And it doesn't look amazing. The graphics are very sparse. There is ridiculous popping. But, they did have to deal with 27 cars on track. And for the most part, it does run at a rather consistent 30 frames per second. Now, there are some tracks, like when I went to Cleveland, where literally like every car is within view at the same time, and the frame rate just plummets like down to like maybe 10 or something. I don't know, but like most of the time, it's probably more consistent than Sega Rally 2, which on the previous episode, Brendan and I were talking about that, and that game had a very notoriously wild and fluctuating frame rate that makes it hard to play. For the most part, this is consistent. But Cleveland actually brings us on to something, a comment that I thought was pretty funny that one of our readers left us. So, and the reason I want to bring this up is because you love that track. Brett Smashvillain89 on Twitter was saying that he had played this game for Dreamcast Marathon a while back and enjoyed it. Surprisingly, really fun. But he called Cleveland the worst track ever.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that I finally have a platform for this. Cleveland is a masterpiece, and anybody who says otherwise, I really encourage you to give it a second look. For those who don't know, Cleveland is temporary street circuit, or I say street circuit. It's actually on an airport. So as such, it is on runways that are extremely wide and encourage massive dive bombs, and you can go 7 wide into a corner and it'll work out just fine. But the great thing is that it encourages overtaking. Yeah, you can defend your line into the corner, but it's going to be a sacrifice on the exit. There's so much passing. If you watch any of the real races, it was a fantastic track. I actually went there 4 years consecutively from 03 to 06. Now, granted, that was past the peak of car at that time, but it's one of the best races I've ever seen. It's such a great place to see a race. That said, it sucks in this game. It's absolutely awful to drive in this game. Between the long or the short draw distances, the low frame rate, the linear AI that will not do any of the things I just described, where you're never getting 7. All that.
You're never getting 7 wide through any corner in this game ever.
Yeah, this is an awful representation of all the things that I love about it. So, I have a soft spot in my heart. Adam has forever said that this is an awful track, and I've never allowed him to see the light.
I want to bring it up just because, I've been giving Trevor shit for this for years. Just because if you look at a track map of Cleveland, it's literally like the same corner 5 times. Now, granted,
Yeah.
it's like it's on an airfield, and like, yeah, the track is very wide, so like the track map doesn't really mean anything. But it's almost like what I can maybe kind of liken it to, which this will be a really random and deep cut, is like the one of like the ice tracks in like Mario Kart 64, where like there really is no track. Like it's a million miles wide, and you're free to go really anywhere you want. That's kind of what Cleveland is. But yeah, the fact that there's no draw distance in this game is really challenging when you're trying to find the apex, because the whole track is flat. You can't like. Yeah, I have no doubt that the things you're describing are probably true in real life, but in this game it's murder, because like you don't know where the turn is.
Yeah, you have to just take a leap of faith and just turn in randomly when you think, or otherwise you go down to 31 miles an hour on the grass.
Yeah.
What the track lacks in scenery and interesting corners, it makes up for in wideness. It's very wide.
Girth. It's a very girthy track.
It's extremely girthy track. Yeah, people don't give it enough credit for its girthiness.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really most of what we can say about Flag to Flag. We were trying to, before this show, Trevor, you were asking me, like, how we split this up, how we talk about the game versus all the context. And I was like, I feel like we're going to need to talk a lot about context, because there's really not much to say about the game itself.
Yeah. I mean, it has a soft spot in my heart, not on its own merits necessarily, but because of the subject matter. It's a kind of a not forgotten era, but an underappreciated era of racing, I think, that I'm glad has been preserved in some way. I mean, going to races with my dad at, like, Michigan Speedway or Nazareth Speedway, Cleveland, like I said, like those were the foundational pieces of what got me into racing, which is taking me on a different journey, and it really changed my life. So to see this preserved in some way is really pretty nice for me personally.
Yeah, like it's interesting, because last week on their podcast I listened to, the official F1 podcast, Beyond the Grid, they interviewed Mario Andretti. And it's so... I can't put into words how surreal it is to hear him say, like, yeah, I won races in Flemington and at Nazareth. And I'm just like, geez, like, that's my backyard. Like, growing up, we're both, we went to high school together. You and I were both from that part of Jersey. You live in Easton, Pennsylvania now, which is right around the corner from Nazareth. It's weird to be able to play. Well, still next to Nazareth, the town. It's weird to play a game like this and see like Nazareth as a place I could go. Because like you don't, especially where we come from, like no one really. There's always like the jokes about New Jersey, a lot of which are deserved. But you expect New York is represented so many times in every game, but when has Nazareth, Pennsylvania ever been ever been depicted in a video game? It's pretty funny.
I can think of twice. I mean, I know of this, and I can think of the EA Sports NASCAR games that represented it until it went defunct and they changed the location to Hawaii. Like, just like that's the only 2 times I can ever think of it being in a racing game.
Also, like a crazy track, because it's so, you're like always turning. It's so small, like it's so unique.
There's elevation change. Like when does that happen on an oval? That's crazy.
Yeah. So it definitely holds a soft spot, I think, for me for those reasons. Like you said, it's not a great game, but there's a representation here that just is lacking, or has kind of always been lacking in motorsport. I feel like the thinking is always that like Americans only care about NASCAR, which is probably more true these days than it was back then. But no, there's a rich history of other forms of racing in this country that get underrepresented. So Kart Flag to Flag is worth visiting if you have a Dreamcast and you share that sentiment.
Yeah, I would definitely give it a shot just to check out what it was, and it does have some value to it. It's not like it's devoid of reason for playing it. I think it is a quality game. Personally,
it's also crazy cheap.
Yeah.
You
can find it for nothing.
Cheaply. Yeah, it was never released in Europe, as far as I understand, because Brendan and I were trying to figure out a way he could get a copy, and he was like, "Oh, I guess I have to import it." And I was like, "Well, that's not really a problem because like 80% of Dreamcast can be very easily used to play illegal games." But yeah, it is really cheap. It's not a rare game at all.
Yeah, and not to get too off track, but I would like to recommend, if anybody wants to probably have a better representation of the racing in a with some decent physics, I would probably recommend the Kart Factor mods for R Factor, or Kart Extreme, which is a revision of that mod for a couple different PC sims that you can find out there. So if you are into PC sims and you want to race kart cars on official tracks with all the liveries and everything like that, that is a really, really excellent mod out there for anybody who's interested. But if you're looking for a little nostalgia, yeah, Kart Flag to Flag is a pretty middling game that I would say is worth your time.
Yeah, I mean, it's so great that the community stepped up and did that for games like I mean, R Factor has been modded a million times over, but at least you can turn to something like that for a more realistic interpretation. Because that's the other thing, is like these cars don't make it into racing games really anymore. I don't know if it has to do with licenses. I mean, I'm sure that probably plays a role, but like, I feel like now we're starting to see like old F1 cars pop up in like some games. Even in Forza, they've got like, the James Hunt and the Niki Lauda cars, but like these cars, they're just essentially lost to time, which is really a shame when you listen to interviews with drivers and stuff, and they talk about the experience of driving these cars as like nothing else on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000 horsepower, no traction control, very little aerodynamics, a lot of weight to the cars. I mean, they were true monsters. I really wish were more represented in the racing culture today.
You point out to me that Burnout 3 does have some kind of I don't know if it's a kart or what, but
yeah, they had two different open wheel cars. They had the Euro open wheel racer and they had the US open wheel racer. And one was very clearly based off of, some generic mold of what an F1 car was at the time. And then the US open wheel racer was very clearly a Reynard chassis from the late 90s, early 2000s. It's hard to put an actual date on it, but it wasn't licensed or anything, but it was, there was some effort made, and I cherish that. So thank you very much, Codemasters, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a weird twist, that's probably Burnout 3 is probably a more accurate feeling of what it's like to drive that car than Kart Flag to Flag, because it is very tough to drive and loves to get sideways, and also is incredibly fragile.
Yeah, exactly that. There was actually a damage model in that.
Right, true. Also true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that just about covers it. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. This was a great discussion. I feel like we got through everything that we wanted to bring up. Again, helps because there's really not much to say about the game itself. But yeah, this was a good time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is definitely something we've talked about doing since we started doing this pod, and I'm glad it finally came to fruition.
Trevor, I know you're not the most active person on social media or whatever, but given that you're on the show and everybody's entitled to their plug, where can people find you if they want more tidbits and references to American open wheel racing history?
Sure, yeah. Well, my @ on Twitter and Instagram is @Trevor Longman. You can find me there. Can't guarantee there's going to be a surplus of kart-related content on there, or content in general for that matter, but you can follow me if you'd like. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, so that's about it. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Cheers.